will start off this wonderful evening event with an amazing presentation. But I want to point out that we have two people here who are available to answer questions. The first one has been with Oracle since 1995. Looking at this audience, I'd say there are a few people here who have not been born then. So please welcome Penny Avril, who's over there and available to answer questions. And then our main presenter, who's been with Oracle for the last 11 years. Please welcome the lead security architect of Oracle Database, Mark Fallon.
Actually been in Oracle a little longer, just 11 years I've been doing this role. And what my role is I concentrate on the security of our products as opposed to security features in our products. So it's my job to get developers facing the right direction and think about how a hacker will attack their product and how to defend against that. So as part of that job, I do everything from design reviews, code reviews, responding to researcher reports, do developer training, so on. This talk actually came out of that. So, whenever we're looking at an attack, we're looking at a couple of things. We're looking at intent. What are they after? We're looking at capability. What can the attacker actually do to the system? We're looking at the opportunity. What doors have you left open? And then we're looking at the impact. So, when we're looking at intent, primary intent for most things is going to be financial. They're after money. If I'm going to use my time to go after somebody else's system, I want some payback, I want some cash. After that, generally then information gathering. And by information gathering, we basically mean spying. I'm either nation state looking for information, I'm one of your competitors looking to get IP, I just want your data because your data has some value to it. Then you get on to kind of like the idle curiosity. You have the guy who hacks the Pentagon looking for UFO descriptions. Who also got convicted. We have malicious intent. Basically, I don't like you, so I'm going to take down your systems. And also, we've seen something new. We've seen people actually looking to leverage resources. Now, they'll do this for two reasons. One is that they're going to get to you to get to somebody else because you talked to that other person. Or they want to get to you because you have a really nice, powerful machine. And what do people do with nice, powerful machines today?
Crypto mining!
Exactly, crypto mining. So, I think good resource, Verizon published their data breach report each year, and they showed the trends of what these attacks look like. And typically, financials up there for about three-quarters of the breaches that they look at. Estimated is about 20, and then they group the last bunch together. So they group them as FIG, fun, ideology, grudge. But bottom line, if the data is valuable to you, and you put it into a database, in fact, you might have even paid for a license for that database. But if you put it in a database and you've gone to the effort of actually, well, for some of them defining a schema, but actually putting an application around it and everything else, it's valuable to you. So if it's valuable to you, it's going to be valuable to somebody else. And if it's only valuable to you, the value to somebody else is that they're going to ransom it back to you. So they know that it's valuable to one person, they can leverage that data to make money. And if the database server is valuable to you, it's going to be valuable to somebody else now. So, capabilities. So, as you go through IT today, you look like everything's going to be automated, and you have kind of like Kubernetes to deploy everything and so on. Same way with attacks. All of the attacks are automated. As soon as any vulnerabilities come out, it's packaged up to a script, and at that point, anybody can run it. There's a market for tools and exploits. You can hire a botnet to do distributed denial of service attacks against other people. You can buy malware. You can buy remote access tools. So you're not limited by what you can develop yourself. So not every attack is state-sponsored, but what we're seeing is that state-sponsored tools are leaking out to everybody else. So last year we had the Shadow Brokers group auction off, or they initially attempted to auction off the tools that they got, allegedly from some three-letter agency that is not really meant to exist, But they went to auction off those tools. They eventually gave some of them away for free, and those attacks got turned into things like Knockdown. Criminal organizations put together groups to build these tools to go after servers. Because again, if you will build the tools because they're after money. You look at the attacks on the SWIFT banking system. So the SWIFT banking system is the back-end system for the banks where they transfer large amounts of money between banks. Hackers got into that, and then they started adding in transactions to send money to their accounts. They got it out through the Philippines. Now that was the first attack on the SWIFT banking system. There's been 3 or 4 more successful ones since. But we also saw that shadow brokers released a tool of attacking the SWIFT, but they were going for a different thing. They were just looking to see where the money was going. So, the easiest thing that researchers and attackers do is that they just troll the web. They just go looking for systems. And about 2 years ago, it got very popular to go through all of Amazon or Google and look for servers that didn't have a password. And you have researchers would publish out kind of like, oh, I found this nice chunk of data off on Amazon. So they were going to kind of like CouchDB, MongoDB, looking for, because the initial install on those services was install it without a password, so anybody could query it. Very useful, very easy to get some application running against it. Very easy for an attacker to go and pull down that data. So you had a number of journalists and researchers publishing the sorts of data that they were finding up there. So you had the over 2 million records that represent the terrorist database. The banks keep a list of all the people you shouldn't do business with. That list got leaked. US. Now, you might decide that you don't want to do business with those people too, and you might actually think that list has some value to you, but it also means I got on it? No, I didn't. I want them off of them. We had US voter records repeatedly. Now, these were typically from organizations that were collecting the data to go sell to political parties, but all of their data leaked out on the web, so they got that away for free. We had all the Mexican voters, 93 million of them. For them, there was a lot more personal information in there, so we had the Mexican equivalent of your social security numbers and everything else in that bundle. And then we had the dating records of 1 million people off the Beautiful People dating site. Yeah, I wasn't on that list either. So, then last year, what happened to all these systems that were installed without any passwords is that they got attacked by ransomware. Because to turn those records into some money, you have to go figure out what the data is and who you could possibly sell it to and not get caught while you're doing it. So last year they turned it into ransomware. So the ransomware attack would basically find the same host that hadn't put a password on their database, read all the records, delete all the records, and leave a note behind. If you want your data back, please pay X number of Bitcoin to the following account. Of course, this is a very easy attack to automate. As I said in the previous slide, everything is looking to be automated. I'm sure everybody here could easily write a script that would read all the records from a database, delete all the records, and insert a note back. But it actually got so successful that you had different groups attacking the same databases, and they would basically start replacing each other's ransom notes. So you'd pay the first one only to see the note from the second one. It is currently those same databases, well, actually not the MongoDB ones, but we're seeing SQL Server and MySQL databases being hit by crypto mining attacks, because they use poor defaults on some of these, they get in and they start running their own code on the servers. Again, because the people doing this looking to make some cash. It's very easy to find these systems. It's very easy to write a scanner that will just look for the open port on a specific set of IP ranges. In fact, some websites have already done it. So you have these websites like Shodan and so on that will actually give you a list of all the systems. So you don't even have to do that work. Someone's actually done that research for you. You can put a query into Shodan, it will come back with all the databases that are available on those IP, listening on the public internet. So, as you go through an attack, it goes through a number of fixed stages. You'll hear this sometimes referred to as a kill chain, but that's not totally appropriate because this usually gets repeated in cycles. So the first bit is recon. I want to find the system, or I'm looking to target a particular individual. So this is where I'm going to do my chosen search. I'm going to do a port scan. I'm going to look to figure out what versions of the software that they have, and do those versions have any known vulnerabilities. Next thing is I'm going to compromise the system. I'm going to use typically a well-known attack on the system. That's frequently a 0-day against one of those systems, and I'm going to get something running on it. Once I have something running on that first box, I set that up as my control. That is my beachhead. And from that beachhead, I will go through the rest of your organization. So this is where we get into lateral movement. So I'll get onto the first box, and then I'll see what that box can talk to. Actually, for most things, once you get onto that first box, it has credentials going to talk back to the database. If you think of a standard 3-tier application, that mid-tier has some credentials to go talk to the back-end systems. So most of my job's done at that point. Once I get onto any of these systems, I'm looking to elevate privilege. I'm looking to get as much control as I can. I will start installing keyloggers. I will start looking for what your admins are doing. I'm going to start looking over the shoulder of what your admins are doing. And then the final stage is complete the mission. Well, complete the mission will depend on what you're trying to do. It's leave the ransom note behind. It's get all the data. It's update the records, because updating the records might have a side effect that you want. Swift banking, the updating the records was to transfer money to my accounts. Actually, there was a guy who got convicted in Michigan about 2 days ago. His aim was to get one of his friends out of jail. So he attacked the Michigan Department of Corrections. He got in, initially he tried phishing attacks, so sending emails and trying to get this, and then he did a pre-texting attack where he basically phoned up their guys, convinced their guys to install a patch of it's a very visible fence I'm not supposed to cross. So they got convinced their guys to install a patch, and he did that by setting up a burner. They didn't actually document what the patch was, so some software that they had in their systems. He convinced them by doing that, by setting up a website that looked very much like one of their own internal websites. The only difference was that the final letter was not a W, he spelled it with 2 V's. So he had a valid certificate for the website, so all that looked good, the browser wasn't warning, they downloaded the patch, and all of that looked fine, and at that point he's installed malware onto their Windows systems, and then that's his beachhead, and then he started going after it. He got caught because his updates to the system were immediately noticed. So at that point the FBI got called in, they traced him down. I think he's now serving 7 years. They didn't actually document what happened to his friend. I don't know how his parole hearing is going to go. Well, do you really want to be cellmates if his parole hearing took a dip because of that one? No. So, how do I get in? Sure. Okay, we'll try this one. Oh, sorry. And don't go that way. Okay. So, we look at the attack surface. So most people start off with a database. And most DBAs will say, I've got this database, this is what I'm concentrating on, this is my database. Now, we make copies of the data to a whole bunch of places. We make backups. You do make backups, right? We make copies to dev and test, because you shouldn't be doing dev and test on your production systems. I'm worried about how many people are laughing at this point. We create data lakes because everybody wants to do analytics these days. But data is not useful unless you have something processing it, unless you have something querying it. Data by itself needs someone to actually use it. So we create both internal and external apps to go query this data. Then we start introducing people. Yeah, always a bad idea. They're the ones who file support requests. So we have employees using these systems, so employees using your HR system, your procurement system, and all of that sort of stuff. You have administrators who are working with these systems and developers, because they have to be involved at some point. But also, we're here to make those systems are put in place to do some business. So you end up talking to your partners, to your suppliers, to your customers. And the traditional clamshell model for all of this was, we'll throw up some firewalls. Jump past. So we throw up some firewalls. And people usually go, I've got a firewall and done, yes. You notice I drew all the firewalls as dotted lines? Because at some point you have to actually talk through that firewall. At some point you have to take the request from your customer to your database, because if you can't process it and you're out of business. At some point, your admins will have to be able to log into your database. So at some point you cross all of those boundaries. So guess who I'm going to try and leverage? I'm going to go around that map and look at every one of those and see if I can leverage anybody there. And if you look at some of the breaches that have happened in the past, so you take Target. Target got taken down by an attack from their HVAC vendor. So their heating, air conditioning guy, they got through those systems onto Target, and then we all got those wonderful notices about your credit card number might have, employees. You've told all your employees, and you've all got the message, don't click on links. 93% of attacks involve some sort of phishing. So that still works. RSA, large security company, got taken down. That's about dying off. Let's see if we can get someone to put that up. So, RSA got taken down because their HR department clicked on a Word document. We had a bunch of Apple and Facebook got hit because their developers were all going to the same coding site. It was iPhone Dev SDK. So that was a watering hole attack against their developers. Admins, how many of your admins tell the world on LinkedIn that they're a DBA? Well, these days. So, guess who gets the email? Guess who gets the phishing attack? So I'm going to leverage against your DBAs to use their access to go through the rest of the system. Now the attack surface has even grown even more over the past couple of years because everything now needs to be on the internet. So we have the Internet of Things. So the fridge in the break room has a web server in it. You laugh, try patching it. Light bulbs have Wi-Fi connections. Why? The most recent story that came out was Darktrace, a UK company, documented one of the investigations that they looked into. And it was an attack on a casino. And the way that the attackers got in was through the thermostat of the fish tank in the lobby of the casino. Again, all these Internet of Things have a small little web stack running a small little server that is open to the same set of attacks that you have to start thinking about for all of your applications. Speaking of applications, Panera Bread was one of the questions. So how did they get in there? Well, you know the way that every single company now has an app that will kind of like speak REST? So Panera Bread, they put up they had an app. You would log into the app. But it wasn't just the app that was going to be making those requests. And people started looking at the requests and kind of going, what happens if you put somebody else's number in here? Oh, I get their account details. So the thing that's going to be talking to your endpoint, to your REST endpoint, mightn't necessarily be the piece of software that you designed to run the phone. It's anybody who can talk to that endpoint. So I'm going to look at leveraging whatever I can to go after. Okay. So I'm going to use whatever access I can to go after your systems. So what happens when I get inside a database? Well, if we maybe we roll back from that because I'm trying to remember what way I have my slide order. So as I said, as you look at the breaches that happen on various systems, this is what falls out. So we'll take Equifax. So we've all heard of the Equifax breach, and some of you might have signed up for credit monitoring or credit blocking, whatever They were deciding that you should. So, but how did they actually get in? Well, what happened was that there was an open source module, Apache Struts, announced a vulnerability. And they announced the patch. And it was about beginning of March. It was March 6th, actually, when they announced that one. March 10th, attackers used that vulnerability to get onto web servers in Equifax. Now, that's 4 days. How many people think all the production systems in wherever they work, wherever they go to school, are going to be fully patched for every known vulnerability in 4 days? Anybody going to suggest that they do that? You see, I told you it was going to be a smart audience. Nobody put their hand up for that. So once they get onto the first node, they start installing something that referred to as web shells. And a web shell is basically a script that's going to run off your web server. And that web shell basically allows them to run code as that web server would run code. So it has access to everything the web server has, which when the web server has credentials, it has access to other machines. So that's the point that they're going to pivot off to go through the rest of your network. By the end of it, there was meant to be something like 40 different web shells installed right the way through Equifax's network. So once I get persistence on one, I'll get persistence everywhere else. I will build up my beachhead across all of their network, and I will get every last piece of data that they can out of it. Now, Equifax wasn't alone at the time. Deloitte ran the same time, got done. So in Deloitte's case, they weren't looking for data, well, they weren't looking for personal information, they were looking for data on deals. So Deloitte do all the kind of like these sorts of deals for people going public and everything else. So the way that they got onto those ones was that they had their web server, their mail server in the cloud. So, but the mail server admin account was, they got the passwords for that, it wasn't two-factor authenticated, and they started getting details. So they ended up having to report all this to the SEC. Now, the really interesting thing about both of those attacks was that as soon as those articles started to come out and people started to describe what was happening there, is that more articles came out about them. So all of a sudden we started seeing articles about some web server that Equifax had down in Argentina with the password admin. Or you saw details of Deloitte's entries up on GitHub that started revealing passwords for remote desktops, databases, and other servers, because it was all in their files that they put up to GitHub. So if any of you use GitHub today, go home and look for the phrase kind of like AWS_secret, just in case. Yeah. Now, all of these got to the press because it was a case of kind of like blood in the water, let's go sniff around these companies. So, the problem with that is, we got to hear about all of those because of the other news stories. This is happening on a daily basis. People are actually scanning for these phrases through your GitHub repositories. It's just it's not making the headlines because the other hack hasn't made the headlines. So as we mentioned, some of the ways that people get in, generally stolen passwords. This happens through hacking, phishing, malware. Weaker default passwords, because you did change all the passwords on the things you installed, right? No one has left admin. I didn't go searching for the writers here. 40% involved a web application. Lots of the money attacks involve web applications. And insiders were actually kind of fairly well split across the board. So C-level, as well as admins. And the issue that Equifax had where it was only 4 days, is nothing. One of the other charts that they brought up for some of the investigations was showing how old the bug was when the system got compromised. So all the systems got compromised in 2015, for this particular version of the report, got compromised in 2015. The bug that was used in 2015 came from 2013, 2010, 1999. At this point, you're pushing it to even find the bugs, to actually find the pieces of software that's running with it. One of the questions that we asked at the beginning was, what did SQL Slammer attack? And the answer was correct, SQL Server. And I provided the questions, and The reason I've actually put that question in because February there was articles coming out that SQL Slammer is still alive. They're actually seeing new instances of SQL databases being hit by that. The patches for that have been out for over 12 years.
Wow. 2005 it was identified. Microsoft did absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I saw some of the story on that, and Mr. Litchfield's part in it. So, as we said, Deloitte, and they found unprotected RDP endpoints. So these are all the things that people are looking for. And we only hear about the ones because they're tied to a story. But these are the things that are being found today. Yes?
They just stuck that USB in there. They never asked you whether the name of possession. I mean, you know...
But it's mine, and you can trust me.
Actually, seriously, like, I find that, you know, we talk about security and we do these things, but we don't actually, you know, this is the kind of lax thing that, you know, somebody...
No, absolutely, and that's why we'll actually get on to what you can do, and it needs to be a combination of things. So what you were looking at, the USB coming in, yeah, that's going to fall in with endpoint protection. And what sort of endpoint protection have you actually deployed? Going back to some of the breaches, so OPM, Office of Personnel Management, these are the guys who do all the background checks for the government. So their system relied on perimeter defenses. They relied on firewalls. And they had firewalls, so they were fine. They got compromised by multiple attacks. At some point, I think they were tracking 3 different teams moving through their systems. Malware was being planted right the way through, so as they were trying to get onto systems, and as I was saying, they were looking to elevate their privileges to the point that they're actually installing keyloggers onto their database admins' systems so that they could get the data for the databases. And what was in the databases? Well, the databases contained all the details for all the background checks for everybody who worked in the government. And so people were kind of go, oh, all that PII information, I have to start running credit reports and everything else. That data never actually went on sale anywhere. And then they tied it to another attack. They tied it to the Anthem healthcare attack. And why would you tie the two of those two things together? Well, OPM does the background checks for everybody, except the CIA. Anthem provides healthcare for everybody, including the CIA. So, I have a table over here with one list of people, and a table over here with a second list of people. Anybody going to volunteer the query? So I've got in. I've done my phishing attack. I've leveraged a known bug. I've leveraged some weak defaults. There's one set of attacks that are attacking MySQL and SQL Server databases at the moment. It all looks like it's coming from China, but the way that they get into a system is that they're looking for weak passwords or default passwords. Once they get onto those systems, they then start leveraging those systems to go after other ones. So they set some machines aside to do port scanning of other things within the network. They use another set of machines to actually run to, once they find machines, they get offloaded. Then those machines do some more scanning, identifying vulnerable pieces of software, and then they have a third set of machines that actually do the exploit. So you've got 3 different machines from 3 different IP addresses all working together to go hack your system. So what are my aims? It really depends on my motivation, but it's a database, so I'm going to try one of 3 main things. I'm going to try and retrieve data, because the data has some value to me. I'm going to try and modify data, because the data might have some value to you, or modifying the data has value to me in some way. Or I'm going to use I'm going to elevate privileges and pivot. I might go after a test system because it has a DB link to your production system, and it's the production data I'm after. I'm going to get into that server because I'm going to use the server's ability to interact with the operating system to drop down a keylogger, as in the case of the current attacks that are happening right now. If I'm going to retrieve data, yeah, I'm looking to read PII, credentials, documents. I'm looking for IP. Typically, direct SQL connection, I'm just querying a database. And that's typically loss, that happens through lost credentials or SQL injection. Maybe signaled by high loads in the machine. We had one of the customers I dealt with, they came back and said the only reason why they discovered that they were being compromised was because their DBAs were looking at a machine that had a high spike in their production workload. And then they associated that production workload with a developer's account. So they phoned up the developer, "What are you doing to our production servers?" And he replied back, "I'm not logged on." Indirect exfiltration, so you're looking at kind of like blind SQL injection. So you're looking at the side effects. So we had kind of like a meltdown inspector with side effects at the chip level. Well, blind SQL injection will have a side effect within the system. So we've seen attack tools against the database that use the resolve command to actually start chunking out the data 16 bytes at a time. So what they would do is that they set up a DNS server on evil.com and then just start querying hosts at evil.com. But I own the DNS server at evil.com and I would get the full list of all the host names that I've tried, and that's how I chunked my data out. Maybe just signaled by volumes of requests. And in the case of kind of like an APT, an advanced persistent threat, they're looking to collect the files, they'll move the files to one server, and then they'll look to actually transfer the files off of that server. Modifying the data. I'm looking to adjust balances, transfer funds, release my friend from jail, grant more privileges to myself. I'm looking to elevate my privileges, get even further. Harder to do with a SQL injection issue, not impossible, depending on where it is in the actual SQL statement. Attackers, generally you start needing to do a bit more research. Attackers need to understand the schema and the business logic. If they want the right business outcome to happen, they need to know something about the application and what tables they're touching and so on. Scanning of metadata might be a signal, but if you're going after something like the Swift banking system, they've done all this off-site first. All the things needed. You need to monitor your systems. Monitor any of the sensitive tables. Once I'm looking at, as I said, the database I get into mightn't be the database I'm after, so I'm going to elevate my privileges and pivot off. So if I'm looking at system privileges, the ability to change non-schema objects, I'm looking to see if I can get out to the OS and do things at an OS level. So you have the execute command shell stuff on Windows, you external jobs on an Oracle database. I'm looking at if I have any in an Oracle database, I'm looking to see if I have any non-public grants. The security of some of our features relies on you getting a grant on a particular package. We don't grant those packages out to public. Access to the OS, so you're looking at kind of like what ACLs this account has, what actual directory objects I can touch. Can I do external jobs? Do I have any of the Java system privileges to go off and launch processes, load libraries, etc.? Access to other systems. So, does your dev system have a database linked to your production system? Can I now use that to get in and get all the production data? Okay, so the next slide is, so one of my jobs is to teach developers what they should be looking for, or how they should approach their system, and it's taking that orthogonal view. So we have some great guys who understand parts of the database and processing SQL that I will never dream to understand. I have some nightmares, but yeah. So very clever people who will work night and day to come up with features for customers. And they will go, look at this feature, look what I can do. And I have to come along and I have to look at this, to take this orthogonal view of these features and say, yeah, but look what I can do with it. So it's taking that orthogonal view, looking at kind of like what I've been given and what I could actually use it for is part of my job. This is part of teaching developers how to do that. So we were actually going to use this for another giveaway. So on the next slide, but because it's coming up as a PDF, I can't show you the answer. I have a picture of a quarter. I've got one, yeah. I actually have a quarter. Yes, Oracle paid me this week. So, quarter. What is this for?
And payment.
It's a money, so
Money transaction.
it's for transaction. So he was already jumping to the next questions. What else can it be used for? So we got one answer here: parking meters. Anybody else want to tell me what else I could do with this?
Coin toss.
Coin toss. Make a decision. Yes, guy in the back right there.
You can't see with the bright lights.
Yeah.
You know,
Anybody?
one place you could still make a quarter.
Screwdriver, absolutely. I've used one to leverage over a paint can. So yes, screwdriver for this nice lady in the front row. Pardon? Laundromat, yeah, laundry, perfect. What?
Electrical short.
Yeah, but that actually, yeah, but that's actually hard because you have to try and get the coin in there and under the lid and everything else. It's a bit of a painful.
Electrical short.
So one of the rarer answers I get is to actually jam open a fuse, and that gentleman right there got it. Don't plug too many things in his house. Anybody else? Yes, we have the football hooligan in the second row there. Yes, you can use it as a weapon.
Magic trick.
Magic trick, yes. And we said something was for lock a car door.
Payphone.
I'll take your word for it. I've never actually tried that one.
Payphone.
Use it to pry something open with?
Yeah, unfortunately, the nice lady on the phone got that too before you did. Yes. Lottery card, yes. You could use it to make more money. Scratchers. But yeah, that's so. So you got a lot. You got a number of the answers that I have up there. So lever, screwdriver. Nobody pointed out that it's also 0.2 ounces. No, what do you want to weigh at 0.2 ounces? I don't know, but 0.2 ounces is something. Magic prop we got. History lesson. Yes. Okay, that one's kind of boring. So who's the guy in the back? Where did all the logos and everything else come from? What's that small d for? Denver Mint. Yes, we had weapon. Force open electrical fuse right here. But that's the way that you need to look at your software. You're providing an API to solve a particular problem, but how else am I going to leverage that API to go after the rest of the system? And that's part of my job, is to actually work this through with developers and think how that's actually done. So we've gone through how an attacker will go into your system, look to take your data, look to leverage the privileges that they get, look to spider their way through their network to go after it. But what can you do? Well, security needs to be a collaboration between lots of different groups. And this goes to what this gentleman was asking earlier on when he pointed out that, yes, someone took a USB stick from me and stuck it into their machine. It's a nice machine. It's currently mining cryptocurrency for me. And yeah, I need this plugged in for a while. I need a couple of bitcoins. So it starts with database security. But it's also the application security. So I said some badly written APIs on top of your database. Your network security. So, who was it? TJ Maxx got taken down because of it. They forgot to secure their Wi-Fi. Endpoint security, which goes exactly to your USB stick. Processes, making sure that people actually don't connect into the database as sysdba to do everything. Don't overuse their privileges. Going through kind of like the secure way of doing operations. Employee education, so remember those, don't click on the emails. Yeah. Physical security, because if you start working on all this, you don't want someone to just walk over the service. And supply chain. Who are you getting stuff from? So, as we looked at the impact and the capabilities and the opportunities and everything else for you, we looked for the attacker, we look at the same for you. So what's the impact today? Well, you're going to spend a lot of time recovering, and you're going to take a ding to your reputation. So the reason I brought up the Equifax one is that Equifax stuff is still going on. They actually announced numbers last week on how much money they were spending on it. So far they have spent nearly $250 million recovering from it. Now this is recovering their systems, doing all the forensics, cleaning up after all of this. They have cyber insurance, and they were cyber insured up to 125 million. They've got about 50 million of that back in cyber insurance, because the insurance policy will only pay out for specific tasks. So the forensic investigation, the recovering of systems and everything else, all the re-imaging, stuff like that. Reputation took a bit of a hit. In fact, they lost a deal with the government because of it. We had a number of their C-level staff disappear as well. We're seeing a lot more fines actually come through. So we've seen successful litigation under HIPAA, the healthcare one. This month, GDPR comes out.
Not for us, but for...
Yeah, well, no, you should start complaining about it now. In fact, this got brought up when Mr. Zuckerberg was up in front of Congress. They were talking about all the protections that they're going to give out to their European customers and the people, and what's going to happen to the Americans. They all got moved to a different server, sorry. For GDPR, for those who don't know, is the new legislation that's coming in Europe for their new data protection regulations. And the reason why lots of firms are really worried about this is because of the maximum fine you can get out of this. The maximum fine is 4% of your gross revenue, which is a pretty big dent into anybody's bottom line. And obviously they learned from the movie industry. You always ask for a percentage of gross, never net. People having to start to deal with class action suits. Now, there has been some attempt for a class action suit against Equifax, but the problem is, how do you tell it was that time your social security number got robbed, that you suffered this, versus every other time your social security number got robbed? So how successful some of those will be is unclear, but we've seen fines come out from the FTC, we've seen fines come out from the FCC, and we've seen some resignations and some firings. Of course, when they start firing people, who's the first person to go after? It's the guy who didn't patch that one system that the whole thing fell down on. It's the DBA. Eventually they'll get up to some C-level suite, but it's much easier for all of that to flow downhill. So what can you do? So we started off with that picture showing all the places where your data has been moved to. So the first thing is understand where all that data is gone. Know what data you have and where it's been copied to, because these are all the places you are now going to have to protect, or actually get your data back from. You have to secure all the databases. Anywhere that you have real data, you'll need to secure it. Anywhere that those databases could be leveraged, where it could be just for the machine or just as a place to pivot off to go after everything, you need to secure all of them. So you start off with the simple stuff. You make sure that there's no insecure settings, no default passwords, etc. And there's tools available to do that, to help you with that. Make sure all the databases are actually patched. So I mentioned that there's still databases out there being hit by SQL Slammer 12 years on. You saw how quickly Equifax got done, kind of like 4 days. Next thing is reduce your attack surface. If it's not there, it can't be hit. So the easiest way to, one of the ways that you can help reduce your attack surface is reduce the places that you're copying your production data to. Like, do you really need your production data in your dev and test environment? No. You need something that approximates your production data. You need something that's kind of like the same number of rows, the same sort of distribution of data, so that you can try your queries and you can see if your stuff scales and everything else. But you don't actually need the real data there. I gave a talk internally where we talk about protecting the crown jewels being your data. And the explanation I give there is that if you're building a new display case for the crown jewels, does that mace and crown and everything else need to be in the guy's workshop? No. He needs something that's roughly the same size, roughly the same shape, roughly the same weight. He doesn't need the real stuff. That can be installed when you move the cabinet in. It doesn't need to be there in the workshop. Back up your data. Easiest defense against ransomware is to actually have backups. But you need to ensure that your backups actually work. It's no good saying, yes, I have backups, yeah, I've been backing this up for months, and the day that you need to recover is the day that you find out that you can't, because you forgot something. So back up your data, but test your backups. You don't have to pay ransomware if you can recover back to the position that you were in before the ransomware hit. Start with encryption. Encryption is the foundation that that all your other security controls are going to be built on. Because encryption forces you to go back through all the other gates. It will force you to go back through the gates that are actually audited. It will force you to go back through all the gates that you can check your authorization and the authentication of the people who are actually accessing the data. It also tends to be one of the easier ones to deploy. Monitor your system. Enable auditing. But if you enable auditing, make sure someone's looking at the records. It's no good creating kind of like terabytes of audit data and then have no one look at it, only to go back kind of like a couple of years later and kind of go, yeah, that kind of data breach. Did we ever see anything about that? Oh yeah, here it was. Bit late. So if you audit your databases, but make sure someone's actually looking at the logs. And it doesn't have to be someone, it can be a process. Start to mitigate your risk from lost passwords. So set up user profiles. Yes, we will force people to rotate their passwords on a regular basis. But if it was an Oracle database, we would tell you to deploy database vault, train your DBAs on best practices, so they don't start putting passwords on the command line and inside of all of their scripts, etc. Remove any unnecessary privileges. So once I have access to an account, I'm going to use everything that account has to go after everything else. So I'm back. So how many coins does this particular person have? Do they have access to tables that they don't really need access to? Do they have access to privileges that allows them to escape the database when they don't really need them? And strong authentication for any of your privileged users. Deploy two-factor authentication. Compartmentalize. Let's go veggie on it. Ensure a breach of one database or one system doesn't imply a breach of all. So if you do have an internet-enabled fridge, does it really have to be on the same network as your production database? So network segmentation. If you're working with an Oracle database, we tell you to put down the lockdown profiles on pluggable databases. What else can I do? Work with application development. Teach your developers. Because the same way that the Panera Bread recently got done, you need to teach them, you need to run them through that coin trick. Explain what people can potentially do with their application. Make them understand that the thing that's talking to their endpoint mightn't necessarily be the piece of software that they are envisioning. In general, when I run through this with our developers, I have to keep reminding them that clients are evil, because you have no idea what's coming in at the other end. See if redaction helps. So if you've deployed applications, can you deploy redaction? AT&T got done for this by the FCC. Oh, sorry, FTC. Yeah, it's the telephone group. So what was happening with them was that they had a call center in Mexico. They outsourced some of their work to Mexico, and they had people there answering your calls, and they had access to their customer information. So what would happen was that criminal gangs in Mexico would leverage that employee's access to get full details of your records and your social security numbers for identity theft. Now, how they leverage them? Some for money, some not so pleasant ways, but they did this to steal a whole bunch of records. But at no point did they need the full social security number up on the screens. So they do use the last 4 digits. They still use the last 4 digits on that one. We would tell people to start deploying developing applications with real application security. So this is one of the features of the Oracle database. What this does, it ties all the security policy for an individual application user back to the database. So that mid-tier that's connecting to the database has no privileges on your data. So if they compromise your mid-tier, you've got your mid-tier credentials, that's fine. It can't do anything because it has no privileges on any of the data. Where the privileges actually come in is when someone authenticates to the application and they have access to just the data that they're supposed to have access to. So even if you compromise one of their passwords, you're only going to get access to the data that they particularly own, which should hopefully just be their own unless you've taken over admin. So think about where your protection policy is being deployed and use something like RAS. So we do, yes, this isn't kind of marketing, we do provide solutions in a whole bunch of these areas. So poor configuration. We offer tools like DBSAT, the database security assurance tool. We also have the configuration checks in cloud control. DBSAT we actually give away for free. It's available on OTN today. Identify your assets, so we would go with cloud control, sensitive data discovery, and actually DBSAT can actually now be put on that road because the most recent release, which came out about 2 weeks ago, actually has some sensitive data discovery in there as well. If you're moving your production data to dev and test, mask it. As I said, you don't necessarily need the real data in your dev and test environment. Stolen credentials, we're looking at database vault. So does your DBA actually need access to all of the data or just access to the system? So you can actually do separation of duty with database vault. There's other things that are tucked in there are things like privilege analysis, again, mitigating the sort of risk of someone losing their credentials. RAS, strong authentication. Applications vulnerability, we would roll out things like database firewall. So database firewall will look at all the SQL that your application runs, and once it has that baseline, if it sees SQL that doesn't match up to that, you have the option of blocking it, or at least alerting you that this SQL came through. Infrastructure compromise, we're looking at encryption. So this is going to be TD, network encryption, key vault. Insider, so redaction would have helped in that AT&T case. RAS, and the other things that we have to restrict people's view of the data with VPD or Oracle label security. Abuse of privileges, we're going privilege analysis, database vault, AVDF, and then system monitoring would be AVDF. And with that, that's the final slide. And I'll open the floor to any questions you have.
Before we take it to the first question, I want to remind everybody we are giving away 2 prizes. The grand prize is this awesome air block programmable drone. The secondary prize is this 2-meter Orthogonal leather branded keychain. In order to win that, you do have to put your business card in the bowl that's been passed around the room. Just hold up a card. I don't know where the bowl is though. I'm sorry. The bowl's got to be moving around the room somewhere. There it is. It's got it. If you don't have a business card, feel free to make one up on a piece of paper, but it does need to contain all the information of a real business card. If it has just a name and we pull it, you will not win. So make sure it looks like a business card. First, I got 6 more of these webcam covers and 1 more puzzle. So the next 7 questions get 7 prizes. Who's the first one? I'm a little blinded by the projectors. Sorry, hand up. Yeah,
Oh, yes.
You retract the question. Okay. Yes.
Can you explain what redaction is?
So redaction is a dynamic masking. So it will look at the result set coming back, and then will mask it on the fly before it gets returned to the user. So it's a way to update your applications so you could do things like put a bunch of asterisks in front of the first bunch of numbers of your social security number and so on. So
yeah, you listed medication, RAS, VPK, OLs. The last 2 features are we had to pay license to all of them. So which one do you think would be the minimum or the fundamental? Because I don't say there are overlaps, but they're dealing with different things, right? So which feature do you think would say is the most important?
going forward, probably RAS with application security, because that's the one that's going to offer the most mitigations. Sorry, any licensing questions, I'm going to default to you for this. Okay, so.
Was the question just about the inside of the RAS?
Yeah.
Yeah, the RAS is just part of the database, so there's no extra cost to that. But by the way, we're on this topic. As Mark mentioned, encryption is the bedrock foundation to all of this. Database managed encryption. If you have a question about the advantages of that, feel free to ask or ask Mark afterwards. And if you haven't heard, certainly on our cloud, we don't want your unencrypted data. So the databases are encrypted if they are on Oracle Cloud. Yes.
At what point does your antivirus software kick in and be able to identify that you're compromised?
It really depends on when you've updated it. So the Home Depot breach was because they hadn't updated their signatures. So the antivirus software will identify known signatures of known bad actors. So there is always potentially stuff that they don't know about yet. So this is why it's really important to keep those data files up to date on any of your antivirus. The antivirus software is there for endpoint protection. So the antivirus software is not going to do anything for, say, a SQL injection in a web application or anything at that level. So this is why I was saying it has to be a collaboration from all of these different groups. So antivirus software, absolutely. So all of your endpoints need to be protected. We scan, as part of our release process, we make sure that everything that we're shipping to customers has been scanned for malware before it goes out the door. And we document the fact and we make sure that all that's up to date. And manufacturing will check our reports on that. So it's important for what you're delivering out to customers, but it also should be on all of your machines and up to date. It will help against kind of like finding some of the keyloggers and some of the malware. It is not a panacea, and this is why you can't rely on it absolutely, and this is why it needs to be a collaboration across the board.
Like if you're downloading something from a trusted site like CNET or maybe even Amazon, how do you know that one of their clients have updated virus definitions that you're not downloading a malware?
No, if you are downloading it, you need to make sure that your definitions are up to date. I would not rely on somebody else. When I do threat modeling for some of our cloud services, and we look at some of our multi-tenant services, and I have to sit down and explain to the developers, no, we don't trust any of our customers. Not because we don't like our customers or anything like that, it's because I don't have to extend the trust boundary through all of their networks and everything else. If you are downloading anything from the web, you need to make sure that the things on your machine are up to date, and that you're scanning the bits that actually got sent to you. Because you don't know at what point in that supply chain it could have been compromised.
Yes. Exactly.
So according to you, what encryptions for database would you prefer to use for my applications database?
So, what technology or which algorithm? So, for technology, I would go with TDE, our transparent database encryption. And the reason I go for that is we've seen other people deploy disk encryption. Disk encryption will help solve your data at rest. What it doesn't do is that it doesn't stop other people or other processes on the system reading the unencrypted version of the data. So you want to decrypt that data as close to the point that you're actually using it as possible to make sure that it doesn't get compromised in other ways. Our database, like SQL Server, like MySQL and everything, provide a whole bunch of features that allow you to go off and interact with files on disk. So people will use things like util file or Java in the database to read a file off the disk. And when it reads it, it will read it like any other process on the operating system reads it. So if you've deployed disk encryption, it will see the clear text version of it. If it goes after a database file with TDE, it gets to see the ciphertext version of it, because the only person that gets to decrypt that is the DB writer process.
I saw your hand up over there. You had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, if we've already found vulnerabilities, how, on other people's systems, how do we, I guess, report them without getting in trouble? Because that's kind of, I haven't found a way to do that.
So the question was, I've been using somebody else's system, or I've been looking at somebody else's system, and I found a bunch of vulnerabilities in it. How do I do the responsible thing? You look like a responsible person. You want to do the responsible thing. You want to tell them that there's a vulnerability there. So any company worth their salt will have an email address to send those things in. So for us, this happens to be secular_us@oracle.com. It's documented up on our security site. Most big software vendors will have kind of like a security abuse for reporting these sorts of things in. You will see a number of programs sponsored by people like HackerOne, where they will actually go and run bug bounty programs for a number of pieces of software. The open source groups tend to be pretty good about accepting that, and they usually generally have a security list. So I would start looking for, and if you can't find one, I would start off as kind of like security at vendor name.
This guy right here is had a hand up.
Yeah, so I know you guys said you guys had a couple hacks and you're able to trace them back. What happens if you get hacked through a source that goes through like multiple VPNs and they're log free? Are you guys monitoring various, networks around the world at, different times to be able to see, okay, there's an attack that might come from this one, I can trace it back? Or...
So I'm not involved with our GIS group. So everything that I've reported here is being documented. So this is anything internal from our systems. So the stuff that working at attribution is a sometimes complex problem, and it's very easy to start pointing the fingers at the wrong one. So yeah, skilled hackers will go through multiple levels of network indirection and everything else, or they'll compromise you from another compromised machine and everything else, so the attribution all goes wrong. Detecting the attack, stopping the attack is what you do first. Attribution, at that point you bring in law enforcement. I saw an interesting discussion about asking about the question about hacking back the other day. And the people on stage giving the presentation was the former head of the NSA and one of the former heads of Mossad. So the two of them were sitting up on stage and they were discussing this. You should be able to find it on the RSA conference website. And they were asked about that, about hacking back, or kind of like going after the people that tried to go after you. And they gave the example of the Sony hack. So Sony got hacked when they were doing that Seth Rogen movie about Kim Jong-un. I don't know what she's talking about the movie, but anyway, they got hacked because of it. Some people obviously didn't like it. But they gave the example, well, if they got the best guys that they had at certain three-letter agencies, they could, I think the technical term was, kicked their asses and hacked back. What do you think the response would be at that point? Because that now looks like an attack on a nation state.
Right.
So that's lobbing missiles over to the South Korean border at that point. So attribution and going back after people, not so much. At that point, bring in law enforcement, do it legally, bring in a forensics team, but identifying that things are happening on your system that shouldn't happen, shutting that down, identifying the loss, and looking to stop that up is what you should be doing first. Yes, sir. Yeah.
So nowadays there's a lot of budget constraints on local state governments and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And with this team of the talk today, probably they would need to allocate some money to prevent cyber attacks on their infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Okay, now city of Atlanta, they were hacked last month.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So interestingly, the ransomware, the price they asked for was ridiculously cheap compared to what I would expect. I don't think this service comes cheap, right? So the local government has the option to either fight it and figure out how to get around it, or pay the ransomware to $50,000. $50,000 is so cheap. You might as well just do it and get it done. So the question is, what are local and state governments doing about this? Do you see an uptake in business in this area, and people want to protect their services, or they just think, well, let the attacks happen anytime we need everything to happen?
I have not seen an uptake in that, but I'm not directly involved in the sales to those groups, so I'm not the person to comment on that. Yeah, they need to protect their own systems because they got hit by ransomware, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the people who deployed the ransomware actually pay out. When ransomware started hitting these systems, you had a reasonably good chance, if you paid it, that it would go out. That, I believe, number has dropped down to about, I think the last report I saw, I don't know the attribution, so don't quote me on this one, was down to 50%. So 50-50 chance that you get your system back. What's scary is that those systems would control kind of like payments to for key services to support people and low income, to help the homeless and so on. So they have a duty to protect those systems because at some point that can lead on to even further implications.
Why is it really?
Pardon?
Why is it really I heard you know I'd rather say.
Oh, ransomware is illegal. It's demanding money with menaces. So if you get hit by it, the first thing you should be contacting law enforcement. Yeah. No, ransomware is absolutely illegal. It's just that people might be looking at, actually in response to his question, this case of, okay, if I pay the 50 grand and get my systems back, that's going to be a lot cheaper than having to deal with the breach and everything else. And I can actually keep running, and it would actually save me some money, and might save me some money in the long run. That's if he actually got the systems back and didn't lose the 50 grand by not getting it paid back. But no, ransomware is absolutely illegal. If you get hit by ransomware, contact law enforcement.
Yes, over there.
So in your slides, you had like one production database, and larger systems, of course, are going to have more than just one production database. Can you talk a little bit about some of these like TDE and network encryption stuff across a horizontal scaling environment where you have multiple databases you're talking about? I'm assuming Oracle has some like, do I have to set this up once, or do I have to set this up once per production database?
So you're going to look to deploy that with the database, and so if you're going to deploy lots of databases, we would push you towards where we would suggest you look at cloud control, and then you're going to come up with templates and basically cookie cut that across your environment.
But so like TDE will have one encryption key per database, or are we talking about one key per the whole pool?
No, we would prefer you to have one per database, because you don't want to be a compromise of one to be a compromise of all. So to help with key management, and key management and certificate management tends to be kind of like the Sisyphean task that gets associated with deploying encryption. So for that, we have Key Vault, so that we can do centralized management of your keys and help with rotation and everything else like that. So we would look at help you with Key Vault in that case.
Yes.
Yeah.
One comment about ransomware, I've heard that a lot of times, or sometimes, they use that to cover their exfiltration, because people say, oh, ransomware, and we solved that. We're all good, but meanwhile they've all taken the data. Secondly, I have a question for you. In setting up this data, I'm a believer, a proponent of data frugality, like collecting as little information as possible, because all this information lying around is going to make us all very insecure. When people are setting up databases, and we work with developers, are there ever plans for retiring data and deleting records? For example, like Amazon has my sales going back 10 years, but what good is that to anybody, right? But it's all there.
Okay, so I'll answer both questions. So your comment about ransomware is absolutely correct, and if actually one of the slides that I have on ransomware, where I talked how it was actually working, was they read all of your data, delete all of your data, and might give it back to you. So yeah, if they have the ability to start encrypting your data on site, they have the ability to read all of your data. Whereas what you're actually going with it was, people will deploy one attack to distract you from what's actually happening over on somewhere else. So they'll launch the DDoS attack against your system to hide the fact that they're actually using one of the connections in to go exfiltrate the data. So yeah, attackers will use one attack as a distraction to go after somebody else. But in the cases of ransomware, yeah, they have a copy of your data. Now, to the second one about the data frugality. Okay, that's the first time I've heard it described that way. So this will come up with the business processes of whoever's doing it. The database definitely supports it. And we went through, I've just spent the last 6 months doing GDPR reviews for a whole bunch of the cloud services for the database. And we had to walk through this as a case of what personal data are we collecting? How long are we going to hold on for this? When they leave our service, or they decide to move their data to another service or anything like that, how long do those things last? So we actually have to work through all of that. Now, for the personal data, we will only hold on to it as long as there's a business need. So for things like logs and everything else like that, they get cycled through, depending on the system, roughly 60 days. because after that, there isn't the same business need to go look at all the times you've accessed the system. When we delete a system, the backups will cycle through in the same sort of time period. But we've had to map that out for all of our services. So as we put up all the GDPR stuff, you'll actually see where we've done that. And we offer the same service across the board. So the same service that our customers in Europe get is the same service that everybody in this room will get. But this comes into the business processes of the individual customer. The database definitely supports it. In some cases, there's legal reasons why they have to hold on to a certain period. Some cases it's just, well, we like holding on to data. So you can partition data on time, and we have lifecycle management of the data. So we have plenty of features to support getting rid of data that you no longer need. It's up to it would be up to the owners of the database to actually walk through with that. But yeah, we definitely support it. We definitely have the features to enable it, but it's going to be a business decision of that particular business.
There's a lot of excitement of people who are jumping into blockchain technology these days.
Mm-hmm.
But the concept of smart contracts with smart registers is quite strong verification, validation, authentication of parties involved. So there's Oracle being policy for database over there, and we have a do's and don'ts for the application developers and technology.
So when it comes to blockchain, first actually think through, does your application really need blockchain? There's some. I have the link buried in an email, and there's actually. Yeah, so there's lots of people jumping into it, and where you have a number of different organizations that have to work together, and they mightn't necessarily trust each other. Blockchain is certainly an interesting technology that can help in those environments. If you have a centralized database with one application, blockchain is going to be overkill. It is not going to add anything through it. There are certain features of blockchain that could be leveraged in other parts of your application. So, say something like the Merkle trees, where they actually have the tree of the different blockchains, or some of the decision support stuff. We do offer a blockchain service, so we do actually have that open ledger. It's available on our cloud today, so we do support people using blockchain, but you really have to understand, will your application benefit from it? Don't go with blockchain because it says blockchain. Like you saw that company who changed his name to have blockchain in the title, was it some tea company? Yeah, had some tea company, and their share price went through the roof the next day because they changed their name to have blockchain. I think that's the indication where you know that the hype just got a bit too far. So understand your application, and do you actually have the environment that blockchain is going to help? So that's the first thing I would look at. After that, yeah, there's some interesting technology in there that can be leveraged, and even parts of the blockchain, because blockchain isn't a technology of itself. There's about kind of like 20 different technologies that get built into it. There's some other stuff in there that could actually be useful across the board, even in kind of like a standalone application.
Okay, great. Both Penny and Mark will be here for one-on-one questions right after this. So all the time we have for QA before we do our raffle. I want to give a great big round of applause. Mark Fallon, thank you. And now we have two prizes to give away, so let's see. Can I ask you to reach in and just mix it all up? You look that way, reach in. Oh, wait, that's what look. Yeah, you can do that, but you have to, if you pull that rope. Okay, look that way. Reach in, grab some. You can't try that hard, just pull something out. Pull anything out of here. Read out the name on it.
Body miss?
Wait a minute. Nope, there is no contact information on this. That is going back in. Sorry, reach out for another one.
You were so happy.
I sent to everybody, gotta have contact info.
Yusuf Saleh.
You won the beautiful 2 minutes. I sent
gonna give it save the best for last. And now this one is for the air block. Can I ask you to reach and look the other way though? Grab one out. Read out the name.
Len Nagpal.
Right there. Thank you very much. Coming up for your prize. Come on up, everybody. Speak with Mark and Penny right now. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.